We have just celebrated Christmas. So what do we do now? Do we remain mindful of the Christmas experience as we go through the season and we embrace the Christmas season? Or do we take hold of the Christmas spirit and try to cultivate the spirit of Christmas in our hearts and in our lives? Or do we embrace the Christmas life? The life of Christmas, the life of the faith that is born in the world at Christmas. Is that what we are invited to do? To embrace the Christmas life. That's what John says. This is a new life, a new way of living, and a new life has come to us in Jesus, the Son of God. John says that everything he writes in his gospel, from the beginning of it to the end of it, is so that we might come to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing we might have life in his name, that we embrace a new life through faith in him. And where does that new life begin? Well, it begins with God. John preserves a Christian hymn from the first century, an early Christian hymn. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. He preserves an early Christian hymn in these first 18 verses of his gospel. He interjects a couple of things about John the Baptist, but the rest is really this song of invitation to a new way of living, and it begins with God. How many times is God mentioned in the first 18 verses? 8 times. 8 times, and it begins with God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It starts with God. Our faith in God. Do you believe in God? And that's not really a rhetorical question. That's a real question. Do you believe in God? Now, a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to spend some time reflecting. I was driving over the hill in the morning on Route 17, and someone had unfortunately driven off the road and blocked one of the lanes, and so I was invited by the mob of traffic I was caught up in the middle of to sit still and reflect on my life and reflect on the meaning of things. And so, sitting there on Highway 17 and stuck in traffic until the tow truck could move this car out of the way, I asked myself a question. I did a thought experiment there, stuck in traffic. What would life be like if I didn't believe in God? It was a thought experiment. What if I didn't believe in God? What would my life be? And sitting there in traffic, it occurred to me that if I didn't believe in God, and I really tried to infuse myself with not believing in God, I would have nature. I was surrounded by nature, the redwoods and the cedars and the beautiful hillsides, and the sky was beautiful. I would have nature if I didn't believe in God. And nature's okay. Nature kills us in the end. Sometimes it kills us before our time. Floods and earthquakes and all kinds of things happen in nature. Tornadoes and hurricanes, they happen in nature, and nature is unruly and untamable, and we live in it. So without God, I have nature. And sitting there looking at the cars all around me, and I took out my cell phone, and on Highway 17, when you're in the mountains stuck in traffic, do you have cell phone reception? Yeah. No, you don't have cell phone reception, so you can reflect on the blessing of technology and culture. And that's what you have. You have nature and you have culture. culture with technology and music and art, which can be wonderful gifts, but technology sometimes is a difficult taskmaster to establish a healthy relationship with. And we live in culture and technology. We live in nature. Technology can be our undoing at times. There are unintended consequences to technology. We're dealing with that in terms of public health and mental health. But we have technology. Without God, we have nature and we have culture. And as I sat there, waiting for the traffic to clear, I was sitting in the midst of time. Nature and culture and time. And what happens to our time in this world eventually? It ends. Have you been to a funeral lately? That's what time does to us. Time is harsh. I remember when I was a younger person and it didn't hurt to do some stuff that it hurts to do now. Courtesy of time. Time does that to us. Our joints become a little bit more immovable. We're a little bit more like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, and we need our oil can to loosen our joints and get ourselves moving. That's time. And eventually our time runs out. From the dust you came, and to the dust you shall return. That's what time does to us. And without God, we have nature and culture and time. And then we die. Who wants that life? John says we can choose that life, or we can choose another life, a life where we are in nature, but we transcend nature. We transcend the limitations of nature and live in the Spirit as children of God. So we experience nature, but we transcend nature. We experience culture, but we transcend culture. The law was given through Moses. That's culture. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. That transcends culture. And of course, there's time. But life with God transcends time, who were born not of the will of the flesh, nor the will of humankind, but of God. It is the divine life which is lived in nature and culture and time, but transcends nature and culture and time. And that is the life that John sings about and invites us to embrace. As we contemplate the birth of Jesus in this world, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And it was interesting contemplating nature and culture and time. And I was sitting there. Without God, they don't have really the spark of life in them that is transcendent. But John says that spark of transcendent life came into the world, and it infuses nature, it infuses culture, and it transforms time. And that is the light of God. God is 8 times God appears in these 18 verses. 7 times the word light appears in these 18 verses, and light in the ancient world isn't just what provides you illumination so that you can see. Light is an energy. It's like photons. Photons are an energy, and light is an energy. It is the energy of God that infuses the world and infuses us as we experience the divine life. And so God and light bring us to a person whom John refers to as he or him 15 times in these first 18 verses of John's Gospel. 15 times. So God plus light equals him. 8 gods, 7 lights equal 15 hymns. And he, him, shows up 15 times in these verses. And who is the he, him that John is referring to? Jesus. And how many times does the name Jesus show up in these first 18 verses? 1 time. It's kind of like the invitation comes. And we have the opportunity to embrace it. Jesus is mentioned one time. We are surrounded by the light and life of God. And the way to embrace that and live it is to embrace Jesus and to live by faith in Him. All who received Him, who believed in His name, He gave power to become children of God, who were born not of the flesh nor the will of humankind, but of God. And so the invitation comes. We can live life without God, or we can live life in relationship with God through Jesus, who was born into the world at Christmas. And the life we live is up to us. And we can live in nature and culture and time, and God bless us if we choose to do that. But who wouldn't want to experience more than that? To experience the divine life, to experience the blessing of God that transcends nature and culture and time. So I was reading an article that talked about a minister who had recently retired, and when he retired, he was invited to share with his congregation and his community what his experience of the Christian faith was like. And so he shared it, and they wrote it down. You can read it. It's interesting, but one of the things he says is, I guess I would describe my experience of the Christian faith in this way. He said, years ago, my wife and I had the opportunity to travel to Europe. And we went to Europe and we saw the great cathedrals of Europe. And we saw the art and the sculpture that expresses the faith of so many. And those great cathedrals were built by people who would never see them completed. They started that work and they trusted that others would come and carry that work forward. He said that was an invitation to reflect on the Christian faith, but really it was an expression of the faith of others, the faith of great artists who painted beautiful pictures that will stand for all time as a testimony to their faith. And those great cathedrals are amazing expressions that stand as the testimony to the faith of those who built them and those who continue to share in the life of faith together in those communities. But that isn't my faith. He said, my faith experience would be best described by what happened when we got to the airport at the end of our Europe trip to fly home. We got to the airport in Zurich, and we had tickets to fly across the Atlantic to New York and then back to San Francisco. It was stormy in Europe at that time, and so there were a lot of connecting flights that didn't make it. And they were waiting for connecting flights, and there were people on our flight who were booked on the flight, and they had paid for the flight, but they didn't have seats. And so we got to the airport, and it was pretty much mayhem as the woman at the gate was trying to fit everybody onto the plane as best she could, and we were trying to stay out of the way, and they were making that announcement, if anyone would like to freely choose not to get on the plane, come and talk to us, and we'll give you accommodations here, and then you can catch your flight tomorrow. We'll book you on a flight tomorrow. And no one was taking. Everybody wanted to get out of Zurich and get back to the United States. It was a stormy time. The weather wasn't good, and who knew what tomorrow was going to bring? So we said we waited, and people were going up to the counter and talking with her, and time passed, and it was kind of a frenzy there. And she called my name over the loudspeaker. Would you come to the desk? He said, well, my wife and I got up. We were a little unsure of what this was, but our name had been called. We walked up. Maybe she just wanted to make sure we had tickets and we were good to go. And she said, can I see your tickets? He said, I showed her my ticket. She said, I'm wondering if you would be willing to accept an upgrade. into first class for your flight home. There's a family that wants to get on the plane, and if we can move you, we can put the family together in a section that would include your seats. So would you and your wife be willing to accept an upgrade for your flight home across the Atlantic and sit in first class for your flight? He said he couldn't believe it. Who doesn't want an upgrade? He said, sure, we'd love an upgrade. Oh, it's free. So you just sit here, and when we call the first group to board, you'll be in that group, and you'll have new seats. And they called the boarding finally when all the mayhem had died down. They went in, they sat down in first class, 3 rows from the front. Have you ever flown first class across the Atlantic? He said it was unbelievable. They'd never flown first class before. While other people are getting on the plane and trying to put their luggage in the overhead bin, the flight attendants, he said, were bringing us fruit and cheese and wine. And we're drinking wine and eating fruit and cheese and crackers, and other people are struggling to get on the plane. And then as we're getting ready to taxi out, they bring out the hors d'oeuvres. And he said we had smoked salmon and thin roast beef, sliced roast beef, like you would find in the best deli in New York, this incredibly thin roast beef that was absolutely delicious. So we're taxiing out for takeoff, and we're eating hors d'oeuvres, and who knows what's going on in the back of the plane. He said it was just incredible. And then it was time to take off, so you sit down with the seatbelt. He said, I'd eaten so many hors d'oeuvres, I almost needed to ask for one of those seatbelt extenders to get the seatbelt around me so that I could be belted in for the flight. Well, he said, then we took off, and there was turbulence because the weather was bad. And we took off, and the plane is shaking. He said, I looked at the flight attendant who was sitting by the cockpit door, 3 rows in front of me, and she was cool as a cucumber and just calm as ever. He said she looked at me and gave me the thumbs up and said, it's going to be okay. And she was doing word puzzles in a magazine as the plane bumped along up to reach its cruising altitude. But he said it was an amazing thing to have that reassurance by someone who had been there before that it was going to be okay. He said, I don't know what the people in the back of the plane were going through as we bumped along, but there I was, given perfect assurance that everything was going to be okay. And she worked on her word puzzles, and we sat back, and sure enough, we climbed through the turbulence. And as we reached our cruising altitude, then they served dinner. And in first class, when you fly across the Atlantic, dinner comes on plates with those little covers on them, and the first course, and the second course, and the third course, and dessert. He said it was like fine dining at a restaurant on an airplane. It was unbelievable. Everybody had their own personal television, so you could watch whatever you wanted. Any movie, any television show, sports, it was all available to you, and it pulled up right at the side of your seat. No craning your neck to see what you wanted to see. It was right there in front of your eyes. And then we came in for a smooth landing in New York. And he said, I think I had tears in my eyes because the flight was over. That has been my experience of the Christian faith, he said. When I gave my life to Jesus, it was like there was a place prepared for me, and I had no idea how wonderful the journey would be. It was like Jesus had called my name and said, here, you sit here, and I'll keep an eye on you. And then when the times of turbulence came, he said, Jesus was there with me, and I knew that in turbulence I was with someone I could trust. And he has cared for me and for the ones I love throughout our journey in this life. And here I am retiring, he said. And I have tears in my eyes, just like at the end of that flight, because the journey has been so marvelous. And we're invited to choose that life. The life of the blessing of God that transcends nature and culture and time. And to embrace the Son of God and find our lives in Him. It's an upgrade. And who doesn't want an upgrade? In Him was life. And the life was the light of all the people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.